Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Are you exasperated or what? Well, you're in the right place if you are, because in this podcast series with my co-host Gregg Greenberg, author of F Argentina, we explore the current American psyche of being overworked, overleveraged, overtired, and overwhelmed. You're going to find out about America's exasperation with, well, exasperation. So welcome to the latest edition to the Compliance Podcast Network, and where we looked at various exasperating phases of American life. We started with school night, and now we're going to move to a little nasal. So I'm your co-host, Tom Fox.
And I'm Gregg Greenberg, the author of F Argentina. So on this season of F Argentina, we're talking about exasperation, as Tom said. Thanks for showing the book, Tom. Each day, it's nearly impossible to complete a full day without lashing out at some object, animate or otherwise, that's causing intense irritation and frustration. So in today's episode, we explore exasperation with the tale of a foul odor and its aftermath on the number 5 express train from Brooklyn up to the Upper East Side, where I am right now.
So, Greg, I always ask this question because I'm always intrigued about the stories in effing Argentina. This one does seem to be a little autobiographical. You have a lot of elements that I don't think people told you about. I think you have experienced. But I wanted to ask you to explain to a non-New Yorker a little bit about subway etiquette. And also start with, why is the narrator telling this story to a judge?
Oh, well, that's the kicker. You're just giving away the kicker, but that's okay, Tom. You know I love you. But there is a certain subway etiquette. Not everyone follows it. So when you go to other countries, like Japan, for example, I know they're crowded in there, but there's a certain etiquette involved where you don't see people really eating in subways. But in New York, it really is catch as catch can. You see people eating. Sometimes the things that they're eating don't smell so good. And that's really the theme of this story, Malodor on the number 5 express train. As I was on the train once and someone was eating some really stinky food. I don't think that's fair. I think that you have a right to eat food, fine, but if it's a really smelly food, your right to eat food kind of stops where my olfactory sense begins.
Well, one of the things that intrigued me, Greg, was how you worked through the potential candidates. And I think anyone who's ever been a parent or perhaps has been a child will understand that a youngster can occasionally create a malodor, and that malodor can be in a very public and sometimes embarrassing place. So you started, though, with that type of character. Can you walk us through how you came to identify the malodor?
Well, the story is set on a subway car, and I kind of frame it to a certain extent like an Agatha Christie novel or Hercule Poirot story. So basically you have suspects, and I'm sitting there and I'm smelling something which smells really, really bad. And you have a baby and her parents. On one side, you have a bunch of kids. On the other side, it's smelling of Axe body spray. And then you have someone sitting across from me who's got a mysterious container. So those are the suspects of some of what's going on. And then you have people getting on and off the train. So like, Hercule Poirot or Sam Spade or any great detective, I need to find out who is responsible for what's going on in that subway car. And generally, when it comes to etiquette, as I said, I don't think it's right that people should eat smelly food on the subway. I understand a lot of times in New York, you're late for work, so you grab a bagel, you grab a bialy, and your coffee, and you get on the train. But, when it's tuna fish sandwiches or things that have, really pungent odors, I think that's wrong. What do you think? Do you think that's wrong, Tom?
Well, I don't ride a lot of subways, so for me, the New York subway experience is a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells, and I just think it's all part of the melange of the experience of New York City. One of the things that intrigued me about this particular story, Greg, was our last episode dealt with a musical topic of Billy effing J, of Joel. But you used music in this story, and frankly, used a song that I used to love, but I may never be able to listen to again. So could you tell us the song, why you chose it, and the impact it has?
That's a fun question. So basically, when you're riding the subway in New York, you have to deal with a lot of people. So a lot of people, they just listen to music. And I thought that in this particular story, I would have the narrator listen to some Southern rock, right? Where you're from, down south, down in Texas, right? So he actually happened to be listening to That Smell, by Leonard Skinner, right? Can you smell that smell? Smell death around you. And I kind of mixed that one in with the narration of the story, because although it's that song is about drugs, different, but it's still about smells.
Gregg, I'm going to ask you in a moment to identify the malodorous food, but why did you call it the Houdini of foods?
Well, kimchi. One of the potential perpetrators is kimchi, and I call it the Houdini of foods, is because even if it's in a container, that smell will get out of the container, which is one of the suspects in this mystery on the subway car.
Gregg, in addition to the mystery element that you've articulated, you actually have another element, and I alluded to that when we started this podcast, but something happens, the narrator causes all hell to break loose. What did the narrator do, and why is that so New York?
Well, they say when you get on the subway trains, if you see something, say something. Well, in this case, it was if you smell something, say something. So basically, the narrator found out that the perpetrator was about to break out something really smelly, a hard-boiled egg, and peel it. So that's what caused the narrator to say, "Stop it!" and caused a ruckus on that subway train, which led him downtown to court, and he had to explain that to a judge as to why he caused the stampede on the subway car. All because someone decided to eat stinky food. It was an egg. It was a hard-boiled egg.
So I don't know if there will be a second edition of Effing Argentina, or I don't know if the story will be continued.
I don't know if it's going to survive this podcast,
Tom. In front of a New York judge, my impression is New York judges have pretty much heard and seen it all. So can you give us a hint as to what might happen to our narrator in front of the judge, or you don't know?
I don't know. Maybe they'll be thrown in jail, or maybe they'll be let off with a warning. It depends on the lawyer. It depends on how good a lawyer he has.
I'll accept that. So now we're going to get to my favorite quote, and I will have to tell you that this is not only my favorite quote from the entire book, but it is Mrs. Fox's favorite quote from the entire book. And she heartily agreed with the narrator's mother sentiment, which I'm about to read. And the quote reads, "Boys will be boys," or as my mother used to say, "morons till marriage." My wife said the only thing your mother got wrong is it doesn't end at marriage. But leaving that wisdom aside, where did this quote come from, and why is it so perfect in this story?
I think I use that to describe some of the kids that were doing a lot of horseplay on the subway car, and they were spraying each other with Axe body spray, and it really smelled horrific. And I think that the narrator is like, well, they're just a bunch of jerks, but boys will always be jerks until they get married and they're forced to grow up. So I'm glad that your wife found it such a poignant line, and I think it's probably true of most men. They're not going to grow up and really be anything less than a moron until they get married and a woman bends them into shape.
Well, I have to say that was my experience as well. So it was my favorite line, my wife's favorite line. So kudos to you for coming up with that one. So unfortunately, we are at the end of this episode, but join us again for our next episode of Effing Argentina.
Please join us. And don't eat stinky foods on the subway.